Now that we have understood the first 3 chapters, let us move into the next major phase of the novel. This slide is titled, Phase 2, Vanity and the Pastoral Illusion, chapters 4 to 11. Before we go into the individual events, let us understand the title because the title itself gives us the central idea of this whole section. We already saw that the Primrose family lost its fortune in the previous phase. Now they have to live a much simpler life. They move away from their earlier comfortable existence and begin life in the countryside. At first, this seems like a wonderful opportunity. They are poor, but they can still be happy. They have their family, they have their home, they have work, they can live simply, they can remain virtuous. But gradually something changes. The family begins comparing itself with people who have more money and social status. They begin to care about appearance. They begin to desire social advancement. And this is where the word vanity becomes important. Vanity means excessive concern with one's appearance, importance, reputation, or social position. In very simple words, vanity means caring too much about what other people think of us. For example, suppose someone is perfectly happy wearing a simple dress. But then she sees a wealthy person wearing expensive clothes. She begins thinking, I also need expensive clothes. Then she begins thinking, what will people think if I don't have them? Now the problem is no longer the dress. The problem is social comparison. That is exactly the psychological movement Goldsmith explores in this section. The family begins with simplicity. Then they encounter wealth. Then they begin wanting the appearance of wealth. And slowly, the pastoral simplicity that they initially enjoyed becomes an illusion. That is why the slide divides the phase into 2 sides: virtue, the pastoral reality, and vanity, the social illusion. Let us understand both sides carefully. Part 1. Virtue, the pastoral reality. Look at the left side of the slide. It says, virtue, the pastoral reality. The word pastoral is important. In literature, pastoral writing usually presents country life as simple, peaceful, natural, and close to nature. It often creates a contrast between country simplicity and urban sophistication or artificiality. Goldsmith uses this contrast very effectively. The Primrose family has lost its wealth, but instead of completely giving up, they begin adjusting themselves to their new circumstances. They become farmers, they have to work, they have to live with fewer comforts. This is actually a potentially positive stage. Why? Because poverty can sometimes bring people closer to reality. When we have everything, we may take things for granted. But when we have less, we may learn the value of family, hard work, simplicity, friendship, and contentment. This is the pastoral ideal. The family can live simply and honestly. But Goldsmith does not allow this peaceful situation to continue without complications. Soon they meet an important character. That character is Mr. Burchell. WHO is Mr. Burchell. Mr. Burchell is a very important character in the novel. He is an educated young man. He is intelligent. He is respectable. He is capable of behaving generously. But he is not wealthy. This is extremely important. Why? Because Mr. Burchell creates a direct contrast between character and money. Burchell does not possess great wealth, but he possesses qualities such as intelligence, kindness, courage, and generosity. And Goldsmith is going to ask us an important question through him. What makes a person valuable, wealth or character? This is one of the major moral questions of the novel. Burchell saves Sophia. Now look at the important event mentioned on the slide. It says that Mr. Burchell saves Sophia from drowning. Let us imagine the scene. The Primrose family is living its new country life. They meet Burchell. At first, he may not appear to be an important or powerful man. He does not have great wealth. He does not have the social glamour associated with wealthy people. But when a crisis occurs, his true character becomes visible. Sophia is in danger of drowning. This is not a situation in which money can help. Imagine a person falling into deep water. At that moment, you do not ask, how rich is the person who is going to save me? You ask, who is brave enough to help me? Burchell acts. He saves Sophia. This action reveals his real worth. His value is demonstrated through action, not appearance. That is extremely important. The irony of Dr. Primrose. Now comes one of the interesting ironies in the story. You might expect Dr. Primrose to become extremely impressed by Birchall. After all, Birchall has saved Sophia. But Dr. Primrose does not fully approve of him. Why? Because Birchall is poor. This is where Goldsmith exposes a contradiction. Dr. Primrose is a man who talks about virtue. He values morality. He believes in principles. But when it comes to marriage and social status, he can be influenced by wealth. So we have a very important contrast. Birchall has little money but great character. Other wealthy characters may have money but questionable character. Goldsmith wants us to notice this contradiction. Why does Dr. Primrose disapprove of Birchall? Dr. Primrose's attitude is also connected with the marriage prospects of his daughters. He wants good marriages for his children, but he tends to think about financial security and social position. So when he sees Birchall as a possible influence or match, his lack of fortune becomes a problem. This is another example of the difference between what people say they value and what they actually value. A person may say, character is everything. But when choosing a marriage partner, that same person may ask, how much money does he have? Goldsmith uses this kind of irony to make his social criticism humorous. Now move to the right side. Now look at the right side of the slide. It says, vanity, the social illusion. This is where the atmosphere begins to change. The family meets their new landlord, Squire Thornhill. Thornhill is wealthy. He is charming. He appears attractive and socially impressive. But there is a major problem. He is also morally corrupt. The slide calls him charming but reprobate. The word reprobate means a person who behaves immorally or has very poor moral character. So remember the contrast carefully. Birchall equals poor but virtuous. Thornhill equals wealthy and charming but morally corrupt. This is not an accidental contrast. Goldsmith deliberately places these two kinds of men before us. He wants us to learn not to judge people only by appearance. Why is Thornhill dangerous? At first, Thornhill does not look like a villain. That is what makes him dangerous. A villain who looks frightening is easy to identify. But a charming villain is much more difficult to recognize. Imagine someone who speaks beautifully. He dresses well. He is wealthy. He knows how to behave socially. Everyone thinks, what a wonderful person. But behind that attractive appearance, he may be selfish or manipulative. That is essentially the danger Goldsmith associates with Thornhill. Thornhill represents the social illusion. He looks attractive from the outside. But his moral character is very different from his appearance. Mrs. Primrose and social ambition. Now we come to an important development. Mrs. Primrose becomes attracted to the possibility of social advancement. She sees Thornhill as wealthy and socially powerful. She begins thinking about the future of her daughters, particularly Olivia. She wants Olivia to attract the attention of the squire. Why? Because she believes that association with a wealthy man could improve the family's social position. This is a major turning point. The family has recently lost its wealth. Instead of simply accepting their new life, Mrs. Primrose begins dreaming about recovering social status. In other words, they have lost money, but they have not lost the desire for status. That is the meaning of vanity in this section. The family begins to change. This is perhaps the most important psychological movement on the slide. At first, the family is adapting to country life. They are poor but relatively simple. Then they meet wealthy people. And suddenly they begin thinking, perhaps we can become socially important again. This desire changes their behavior. They begin worrying about appearances. They want to impress people. They want to appear fashionable. They want to associate with higher social circles. The family is no longer simply living. They are beginning to perform. That word is very important. Perform. They are performing a version of themselves for society. They are trying to look more sophisticated than they really are. The town ladies. Now look at the final part of the right-hand paragraph. It mentions the town ladies introduced by Squire Thornhill. These fashionable women are associated with the world of social display. Their presence influences the Primrose family. The family begins trying to imitate fashionable manners. This creates humor because the family does not naturally belong to this world. They are essentially trying to learn the rules of a social game. Imagine someone who has never attended a formal party. Suddenly they are invited to a very sophisticated event. They start thinking, how should I speak? How should I dress? How should I behave? What should I say? What will people think of me? That anxiety is part of the comedy Goldsmith creates. Why is this called a social illusion? Now let us understand the phrase, social illusion. An illusion is something that appears real but is actually misleading. Social status can sometimes be an illusion. A person may appear important because of wealth, clothing, connections, fashion, property, or reputation. But these things do not necessarily tell us whether the person is good. Thornhill is the perfect example. He looks socially impressive, but his moral character is deeply questionable. Birchall provides the opposite example. He is socially unimpressive because he lacks wealth, but he repeatedly demonstrates good qualities. Therefore, appearance does not equal character and wealth does not equal virtue. This is one of the most important lessons of the novel. The mirror symbol. Look at the image on the right side. There is a mirror. The mirror is very appropriate for this section. Why? Because the characters are becoming increasingly concerned with how they appear. A mirror shows us our external appearance, but it cannot show us our moral character. You can look beautiful in a mirror and still behave badly. You can look ordinary in a mirror and still be an excellent human being. So the mirror becomes a useful symbolic image for appearance, vanity, self-image, and social performance. The characters are becoming more concerned with how society sees them. And Goldsmith asks us to look beyond the mirror. He asks, what is the person actually like underneath the appearance? The two sides of the slide. Now look at the whole slide. The designer has intentionally placed the two ideas opposite each other. On the left, virtue, pastoral reality. On the right, vanity, social illusion. This is not just a design choice. It represents a major conflict in the novel. On one side we have simplicity, nature, hard work, family, friendship, character, contentment. On the other side we have wealth, fashion, status, appearance, social ambition, vanity, illusion. Goldsmith is asking us, which world produces genuine happiness? And more importantly, which values should human beings choose? The family's moral confusion. Notice something very interesting. The Primrose family is not completely good on one side and completely bad on the other. They are human, they have good qualities, but they are also tempted. They have suffered financial loss. They naturally want a better life. There is nothing wrong with wanting security. There is nothing wrong with wanting one's children to have a good future. The problem begins when the desire for social improvement becomes excessive. For example, wanting enough money to live comfortably is reasonable. But believing that money automatically makes someone superior is dangerous. Wanting to dress well is normal. But believing that clothes determine your worth is vanity. Wanting your child to marry well is understandable. But choosing a partner only because of wealth can become morally dangerous. Goldsmith explores these subtle differences. Dr. Primrose's contradiction again. Students, notice how Goldsmith keeps exposing contradictions in Dr. Primrose. He is a moral thinker. He gives moral advice. He speaks about virtue, but he can also be influenced by social and financial considerations. This does not necessarily make him a bad person. It makes him human. Goldsmith's humor comes partly from allowing Dr. Primrose to narrate events while showing us that the narrator does not always fully understand the irony of what he is saying. That is an important feature of the novel. We sometimes understand the situation better than Dr. Primrose himself. This creates irony. The fortune tracker. Now let us come to the graph at the bottom. The graph is labeled, the fortune tracker. Notice something very important. In the previous phase, the fortune line fell dramatically. Here, it is relatively low, but it becomes more or less steady. The graph says, low fortune plateau. The word plateau means a level or relatively stable stage. So the family has not regained its original wealth. They are still poor, but their financial situation is no longer collapsing dramatically. They have reached a kind of low but stable position. This is important because the main problem in this section is no longer simply, will they survive financially? The problem becomes, how will they behave now that they are surrounded by wealth and social temptation? That is a much more psychological problem. Low money, high vanity. Here is one of the clever ideas behind this phase. The family has low fortune but increasing social ambition. Their bank balance may be low, but their desire for status is becoming high. This creates comedy and irony. Imagine someone who has very little money but spends all their energy trying to look rich. They might borrow expensive clothes. They might pretend to know important people. They might use fashionable expressions. They might spend money simply to impress others. The outside appearance becomes more important than reality. That is the kind of social illusion Goldsmith is exposing. Why is this section important to the whole novel? This section prepares us for later events. The family's desire for social advancement brings them closer to people like Thornhill. And that creates danger. If they had remained completely satisfied with their simple rural life, many later complications might not have developed in the same way. But their desire to recover social status makes them vulnerable. This is an important principle in storytelling. A character's weakness often creates the opportunity for the villain. Here, the weakness is partly vanity and social ambition. The dangerous character is Squire Thornhill. Therefore, the connection is vanity, vulnerability, manipulation. This will become increasingly important as the story progresses. The central contrast, Burchell and Thornhill. If you want one extremely important comparison from this slide, remember these two characters. Mr. Burchell, he is poor, he appears socially insignificant, but he demonstrates courage and generosity. Squire Thornhill, he is wealthy, he is charming, he has social power, but beneath the attractive appearance is serious moral corruption. Therefore, Burchell equals inner worth. Thornhill equals outer glamour. This contrast is central to Goldsmith's moral design. Never judge these characters only by their social position. The pastoral world is not perfect either. There is another subtle point. Do not misunderstand the word pastoral. Goldsmith does not simply say, country life is perfect and city life is evil. That would be too simple. The countryside gives the Primrose family an opportunity for simplicity. But the family's own weaknesses travel with them. Even in the countryside, they can become vain. So the real problem is not simply the location. The real problem is human desire. You can be in the countryside and still be obsessed with status. You can be in a city and still be virtuous. Therefore, the deeper issue is not country versus city but virtue versus vanity. That is a much more important interpretation. Chapters 4 to 11 as a transition. We can therefore understand chapters 4 to 11 as a transition period. The family has moved from wealth to poverty, but now they are moving psychologically from simplicity to social ambition. At first, they accept their new circumstances. Then they encounter people who represent wealth and fashion. Then they begin wanting what those people possess. Then their behavior changes. This is how temptation works. It rarely begins with, I want to become a bad person. It usually begins with, I just want a little more. Then, I want people to respect me. Then, I want to be like them. Then, I will do whatever is necessary to obtain that status. Goldsmith shows the early stages of this process. Important concept. Appearance versus reality. Students, if you remember only one literary concept from this slide, remember, appearance versus reality. Thornhill's appearance, charming, wealthy, socially powerful. His reality, morally corrupt. Burchell's appearance, poor, unfashionable, socially insignificant. His reality, kind, courageous, generous. So Goldsmith teaches us, do not judge the book by its cover. This is not merely a modern saying. It is one of the central moral ideas operating in this part of the novel. Complete story of Phase 2. Now let us tell chapters 4 to 11 as one continuous story. After losing their fortune, the Primrose family begins a new life in the countryside. They have to adjust to being farmers. Their life is simpler now. They have less money, but they can still maintain their family relationships. During this period, they meet Mr. Burchell. Birchall is an educated but poor young man. Although he does not have wealth, he shows courage and kindness. When Sophia is in danger of drowning, Birchall saves her. This action demonstrates his genuine character. However, his lack of fortune makes him less attractive from the perspective of people who are concerned with social position and marriage prospects. Then the family meets their landlord, Squire Thornhill. Thornhill is very different. He is wealthy, charming, fashionable, and socially powerful. Mrs. Primrose becomes interested in the possibility of social advancement. She wants Olivia to attract Thornhill's attention. The family begins moving away from the simplicity of their earlier rural life. They become increasingly interested in fashionable society. They meet fashionable women through Thornhill and begin trying to imitate their manners and appearance. Now the family is caught between two worlds. One world is simplicity, virtue, family, and genuine character. The other world is wealth, fashion, status, vanity, and appearance. And that is the central conflict of this phase. For chapters 4 to 11, remember, farm Birchall Thornhill vanity. Farm. The Primrose family adjusts to rural life. Birchall, poor but virtuous, saves Sophia from drowning. Thornhill, wealthy, charming, socially powerful, but morally corrupt. Vanity. The family becomes increasingly concerned with status, appearance, and fashionable society. Another formula is low fortune plus high social ambition is social illusion. And the most important character contrast is Birchall, poor in wealth, rich in virtue. Thornhill, rich in wealth, poor in virtue. So, students, do not look at this slide merely as a list of events. Look at it as a moral journey. In the previous phase, the Primrose family lost its money. In this phase, they discover that losing money is not necessarily the greatest danger. The greater danger is what happens when they become obsessed with recovering their social position. Their poverty is visible. Their vanity is psychological. They can survive poverty, but vanity can make them vulnerable to deception. Mr. Birchall teaches us that true worth does not depend on wealth. Squire Thornhill teaches us that charm and wealth do not guarantee goodness. Mrs. Primrose shows us how social ambition can distort judgment. And the family as a whole shows us how easily ordinary people can become attracted to the illusion of status. So remember the central message of Phase 2. The family loses its fortune, but the desire for fortune and status does not disappear. That is the irony. They have become poor financially, but they are still rich in vanity. And this tension between virtue and vanity, reality and illusion, inner character and outward appearance prepares us for the much more serious troubles that are going to come later in the Vicar of Wakefield.